I call the Honourable Steve Chadwick.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This is a very interesting committee, the Officers of Parliament, and the Minister's quite rightly pointed out the 3 votes that were considered. And today I want to focus more on the Office of the Ombudsman, because I found this a particularly interesting scrutiny of this office, putting the Chief Ombudsman, Beverly Wakeham, who does a wonderful job, under quite substantial pressure. And those pressures are mounting because it's a small office with an increasing workload. And the Minister did mention about the Canterbury earthquake, and it was interesting that the Office of the Ombudsman office in the South Island was affected by the earthquake, so we had no problem after some examination about whether there needed to be a South Island office, of keeping that office there, but also looking at the Wellington office with a lease expiring, and they need to assess some other accommodation office. But the most interesting aspect of this scrutiny, of this vote, was around the increase needed of 50,000 from 320 to 370,000 to clear a backlog of inquiries. And I think the Minister in the chair, he alluded to the fact that the Office of the Ombudsman must investigate all complaints, even if they're vexatious and frivolous. And I think that requires, and the committee agreed it required, a legislative change. And I hope the Minister, before he goes, gets that piece of work finished for the Office of the Ombudsman. It is crazy that they have to open all inquiries, and then they have to scrutiny all inquiries and complaint requests to see if there is substance to the complaint. That wastes a lot of the Ombudsman's time. It's not a nice to have, it's something that they must do, and so the backlog, the tail of complaints blow out. And I think this legislative change is an initiative that government should undertake. It's also interesting when you look at the parallel with other Commissioner officers and their ability to resolve complaints. There are some concerns coming back to us in opposition about the Health and Disability Commissioner, who's only put 5 reports, released decision findings in the first 10 months of his new term of office, compared to an average of 50 under the previous Health and Disability Commissioner. So we want to look at relativity and the ability to resolve complaints, and there is definitely a blowout in the decisions pending that didn't sit comfortably on the shoulders of the Chief Ombudsman. I think the Minister should also look at a closure target for closure of complaints for these officers, because they're charged with promoting the public rights and then getting answers to inquiries. It's the one place that the public can go to, the Office of the Ombudsman, to get closure on their complaints. And they do look at complaints from government departments, and every electorate MP knows how you receive these complaints. City, district or regional councils, school boards of trustees, universities, polytechs or other tertiary education initiatives, and district health boards. And heaven knows that those complaints will be a measure of how this present government is actually starving these departments of funding over time. And we want to know that we close that loop from investigations and do get feedback very quickly about budget constraints that are going to impact on those departments, especially with the budget that we're going to no doubt have to face next week. So I think the Minister should look at a closure target for these officers and make sure that the public should know that if they complain to the Office of the Ombudsman, there shouldn't be a blowout for over 2 years to resolve some of those complaints. I also want to just mention the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, and that was a convention signed by Officer Ruth Dyson when she was Minister for Disabilities in 2008, in September 2008. And I wanted on the record to congratulate Minister Dyson for her work there. But that has put some more pressure on the Office of the Ombudsman, because now they have, under a section, they must look at a monitoring and a reporting back to the United Nations, which is going to increase some pressure on them, and they needed more funding allocation for that, and I was more than happy that that wasn't a nice to have. That was one of our Article 33s that we must report on, and 230,000 was allocated to that task from this government. There was another interesting aspect in that the existing scope for the Office of Ombudsman was changed by this committee to looking at an appropriation limited to the investigation, resolution of complaints and the provision of advice relating to central and local government administrative actions and monitoring compliance with international conventions. So we brought that more up to date than the current scope. So this work is very important. I want to congratulate the Office of the Ombudsman for undertaking their duties with limited resources, I have to say, and with few staff, and they do a remarkable job, but I think there are some changes that the Minister and the Chair should take notice of. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker.
I call the Honourable Member Kennedy Graham.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise to convey the support of the Green Party to this notice of motion, and I will not take up too much time of the House. I just want to make a couple of points, and they are in particular reference to the role of the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment. When I look at the allocations, the financial allocations that are conveyed to Audit, to Ombudsman and Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, we find a certain asymmetry. With due regard to the different work that is required to be undertaken by these officers, I think you might say in an evolutionary sense it speaks volumes for the priorities which this country and this Parliament places on aspects. Audit, for example, absorbs $65 million roughly annually of the total allocated amount under this notice of motion. The Ombudsman, $9 million, and the PCE, Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, $3 million. That is to say 65, 9 and 3. I did mention this time last year that the amount allocated for environmental work in this respect is very modest and could be increased. I understand in a time of fiscal retrenchment it would have to be triage. We would have to find the money from elsewhere, and I believe that needs to be done. Because I do submit that $3 million is not sufficient. The quality of the work of the PCE remains untrammeled, but the amount of work that the PCE could undertake without question could be increased. And I also note that the PCE budget is held constant over the next 4 years, thereby signalling no change in priority between the environment and other issues. And in our view, sir, that is unacceptable, and the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment should be allocated more than $3 million a year. We want to commend the PCE for its truly excellent work that it has done over the years, but particularly over the past year. The 6 or so reports that it has submitted have been of a very high quality indeed, well researched and well reasoned to logical conclusions. The report on the emissions trading scheme, on the emissions reduction target, on lignite and climate change, on mining the conservation estate, on the draft energy strategy, and thinking strategically about biofuels. That is not to say that the Green Party agrees or agreed with every judgment and every conclusion entered by the PCE. In fact, we took quite definite exception to one of them, the last mentioned one on biofuels. But objectively speaking, we do commend the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment and her office for the quality of the work they do. It is, you could almost say it is outstanding. I'll conclude, but I want to propose the undertaking, I'd like the House to reflect, and I make this comment through to the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment and also to the academic community in general. Two proposals I'd like to make. The first is that when it is essentially that the PCE undertake a new study, I look at the Environment Act 1986, under which the Commissioner is appointed and the functions, and the primary function out of 7 is the following: with the objective of maintaining and improving the quality of the environment, to review from time to time the system of agencies and processes established by the government to manage the allocation, use and preservation of natural and physical resources. And I repeat, with the objective of maintaining and improving the quality of the environment. So we then look, within the same Act, to the interpretation, the definitional clause, and we find that environment is defined as the following. The environment is to include A, the ecosystems and their constituent parts, including people and communities; B, all natural and physical resources; C, those physical qualities and characteristics of an area that contribute to people's appreciation of its pleasantness, aesthetic coherence, and cultural and recreational attributes; and D, the social, economic, aesthetic and cultural conditions which affect the matters stated above. On the basis of that, I would propose for reflection by the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment that a study be undertaken by her office and submitted independently to Parliament advice, a study of the economic conditions in New Zealand which affect New Zealand's ecosystem and their constituent parts, New Zealand's natural and physical resources, and the physical qualities and characteristics of areas that contribute to the New Zealand people's appreciation of its pleasantness, aesthetic coherence, and cultural and recreational attributes. Mr. Speaker, the reason I make that proposal is because from the Green perspective, there is a very close and intimate causal relationship between the environment and the economy, and vice versa, between the economy and the environment. And I submit to the PCE that it undertake a study of the economic conditions of New Zealand, essentially, that affect the environment and New Zealanders' appreciations of the environment in its aesthetic, cultural and other dimensions. The second study that I would recommend is of a broader matter of interest, but I think it is of considerable interest, you might say, to the integrity of government. And that is that the principal purpose of the PCE, as stated, is to, quote, the Commissioner has a unique opportunity to provide Parliament with, quote, independent advice in its consideration of any matters that may have an impact on the quality of the environment, and we have just defined the environment. The mission is to maintain or improve the quality of the environment by providing, quote, robust, independent advice that influences decisions. I have already said that we get very high-quality advice as a Parliament from the PCE. But I think the question is left hanging in the air as to the extent to which the influence that advice has, not only on Parliament, but on the governments of the day. And I don't mean necessarily only this current government. I'm talking about governments since, when was it? The late 1980s, was it, that the PCE office was established? And I think it would not be appropriate for the Parliamentary Commissioner and her office itself to undertake such a study. I would just like to see a broader independent academic study undertaken by a university perhaps, or a group of universities acting in consortium, on the assessment of what advice to Parliament submitted by the PCE office has been adopted by successive governments since the establishment of the office. Those are my two proposals in the context of this comment, and just to reiterate that we do support the notice of motion. Thank you.
I call the honourable member